the way we work is we would see these solutions and we would say, hey, you've solved the chief problem in your own community.
Yeah.
We're going to give you grant funding to spread that solution, one within your own community, and then beyond it, if other communities determine that they need the same solution. We start at the solution in the community, and then we start, like a virus, we start saying, hey, is this a problem that you have?
Yeah.
Our community has solved it, and it can spread as far as the other communities need it. You know, I believe it's inevitable that from the small communities to the large continent to the diaspora, Africa is gonna become something very interesting and inspirational.
I agree.
Hey, Kenny.
Hello, Jermaine.
How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Wow. So, how has the day been?
Yeah, it's been a good day. A lot of calls, but I'm really working on processes right now.
Okay.
Like it's the way I call it is the thing I call it is a bit morbid, but it's a in sudden death project. And what that is if as the founder of Kwanda I was to suddenly die,
yeah,
there is smooth transitional handover to my next right hand person.
Interesting. So you're already planning for succession. That's good.
Yeah,
that's
because
good.
you know, this for me is an institution, so I want to make sure I'm working accordingly.
Wow, that's good. That's one thing that many of us, business people, families, and unfortunately, governments don't do. Wow, man, Jermaine, thanks for. I'm so happy to have you here. Now, tell my audience who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so the name is Jermaine Craig. I'm a social entrepreneur, born and raised in London, England, but of Nigerian heritage. I've spent the last 15 years. I started my career quite early as a designer.
Okay.
And then that evolved into web designer. So then I started to learn about engineering and coding. And then naturally that evolved into product in general. So I ended up spending 15 years building a career in technology, specifically building technology products. And here I am today, basically building my own.
Good. See, you say you're of Nigerian descent.
Yeah.
So tell us. See, anybody looking at your name will never associate that to Nigeria. So tell us a little bit about your Nigerian background.
Yeah, so the name's an interesting one because a lot of people will assume I'm Caribbean.
Yes.
The name actually, there's a part of Nigeria called, or a state called Ogun State, and
Egba.
Yeah, and so that name is actually, people are more likely to know that name in that state.
Yes.
So I've been trying to really figure out the history, like how did that name come to be? And there's been a few different theories that I found. One is actually that there was a time where my family were in Sierra Leone and were educated by missionaries.
Okay.
And so when returning to Nigeria, retained the
name from
I don't quote me on that. But that's,
well, that may be very, very true. I personally know people from Egba who have English or American names. See, in the history of Nigeria, the people of Egba were one of the first people in the region who associated with Western culture. You know, so we have. I mean, And then those former slaves who returned back to Nigeria, some of them were from originally from that region. So when they returned, they, so all that. Interesting. So you say you are a social entrepreneur.
Yes.
Okay. See, some of us are laymen when it comes to that. So tell us a little bit about that and the kind of things you have been involved in that space.
Yeah, sure. So the best way to understand social entrepreneurship is to initially get rid of the social and think about what an entrepreneur does.
Good.
And typically, an entrepreneur is someone who has this vision that they're trying to bring to reality. And if they were able to encounter that vision, if that vision already existed, they would just involve themselves in that reality that already exists. But there is ultimately this friction that comes up where you realize that the only way you're going to see this reality you envision is by being the person to bring it forth. And so that's what an entrepreneur essentially does. They bring that vision forth. Or in more simple terms, they try and scratch an itch or fix a pain point that they're experiencing in their own lives. And so when you add the social to it, it's all of that, but this vision that you're trying to bring forth is geared towards social change, social improvement, and geared towards helping people in general. And so, on one hand, it could be a pure profit incentive. I am someone who finds it difficult to sustain businesses if profit's the only incentive. Because at some point, you make a move and it's like, what am I doing this for? But I think that social element allows me to do things on a more longer time horizon. And so really it's kind of a hack or an incentive that I put in place to sustain my own interest in the things I'm doing, as well as just my want to see society improve, especially in Africa and in the diaspora.
So, see, you say you are bringing Africans in diaspora together to fund local-led solutions in Africa. Okay, so what led you to this initiative? Okay, and what results have you achieved in this space?
Yeah, so it started from a personal perspective that I have on the way I believe everyone wants to direct their lives. So I believe I'm a person who wants to direct my life. I want ultimate freedom to decide how I succeed as well as how I fail, and that's very important to me. I would prefer to have a risk of failure that I direct myself than to have a guaranteed success that someone else determines. I believe not only do people in diaspora share this perspective, but I believe also through conversations, a lot of people on the African continent share the perspective that, Africa, I believe, is going to flourish and that's inevitable. I think it would be a shame if we're not the determinants of when and how that happens. And so my idea was to essentially bring people in the diaspora that share that same perspective and connect them with local entrepreneurs, innovators on the ground that are already taking the initiative to develop their communities and hopefully wider and wider communities and eventually the whole continent, and pair those people together, because I think the perspective is aligned. And that is my ultimate theory as to the most effective way to one, bridge the gap between Africans on the continent and diaspora, and also both lead to the flourishing of Africa or developing the African continent. I think the self-determination is the approach, and maybe not necessarily the only approach, but the approach that appeals to me the most and others that are in the community.
See, when it comes to self-determination, that's my own approach. Okay, now saying I am looking for us to self-determine the direction and the future of a continent. Now, when I say that to people, okay, let me back up. When I have conversations with people in this space, it seems many of them, and this my own personal experience, they think that means we must do everything by ourselves. I do not agree with that. We should be the drivers.
Yeah.
Okay. We drive where we want to go. Okay. Now, once we create that vision of where we want to go, other people can come along and see the vision we are driving towards and do their own thing in that space.
Yes.
And that's what I believe we should do. So, as drivers of our own, the development of a continent, once we make that vision clear to everyone, then anyone,
yeah,
can come on board and drive certain areas of that vision. So that means our biggest goal right now is to map up that vision as clear as possible. And for me, that's something we have not done.
Yeah. And also I would add, the vision has to be, the vision should be compelling to everyone.
Yes.
So it shouldn't be one in which you're saying, hey, to this group or that group, we understand there's nothing in this for you, or it's not a compelling vision to you, but trust us, this is the vision. It should be clearly compelling to everyone. When someone brings forth a vision that's correct, it typically is compelling. It's almost natural. It's kind of like, this is the natural progression. And I think once we kind of are able to map out that vision that's almost seems obvious, like the natural way to move, and it's compelling to everyone, then people will fall in place. And I think it's just it's almost the approach I take, because I've worked in the technology sector, and the approach there is, yes, you have the big vision on one hand, and you also have this process of iteration over time. And so even with the work I'm doing at Kwanda, there's an iteration on psychology. There's, what makes people contribute, what makes people pull back. And we're learning and iterating, and we want to basically contribute this knowledge to the global kind of understanding of, one, what the vision can be, and how to draw people in, how to like strategically and tactically implement parts of that vision, because ultimately it's all our vision. And so there's not going to be one person who determines what it is, but we're collectively going to use shared knowledge to understand what the vision could look like and how it could be tactically moved forward. And I think that's all we're doing ultimately, is we're running an experiment, gathering data and feeding that into the global and shared knowledge.
Okay. See, I like this, right? And I've had difficulties with what I've seen happening with some of our, not political leaders, but some of our social leaders. Okay. When they speak, they share their vision. Okay. And in that sharing, they also vilify those who do not agree with them. And once I see that, it gets me this way, that you are sharing a vision. At this time, we're still sharing that vision, and you cannot determine that your view is so so powerful, powerfully correct that anyone who has a disagreement with that vision is not African. It's always, he has been bought. And that gets me. Okay. Now, I will tell you this. I don't know if you are a Pan-Africanist. I am not. And I'm not because I don't know what it is. Right? I've heard people talk about it. I've heard former leaders from the 60s talk about it. And I ask myself this question. Why has Pan-Africanism not worked? Okay. And this is my view about it. It has not worked because all through the process, all these years, our leaders have not dealt with the issues that other countries and other leaders have. Okay. It seems when the vision of Pan-Africanism came up, the visionaries who came up with it, Nkrumah and others, once they had that vision, they thought this is the correct way to go.
Right.
And for me, I don't know what happened between them, but from what I see today and what the Pan-Africanist leaders are doing and saying, it seems they think, oh, this is the way to go, and anyone who doesn't agree with this is not African or has been bought. And see, that's a lot. And I would say this. I grew up in Nigeria in the 80s and 90s. All through my growing up in Nigeria, I was never really acquainted with Pan-Africanism. Okay, I know about it because my father he studied history and he taught history, so I knew about it, but it wasn't a big thing in Africa, in Nigeria. I got to talk about it more when I went to graduate school, because one of my lecturers, he was my mentor, a good friend of my father at the same time, Festus Yayi, Dr. Festus Yayi, was a Pan-Africanist and a Marxist. So we used to talk about those things. Okay, but apart from that, I wasn't really engaged in that kind of discussion. And I know very few Nigerians of my generation were engaged in that discussion. So that tells me something.
That makes sense.
The biggest country in terms of population and the most diverse country in Africa wasn't really on board with it. And I think that the reason is that we vilify those people who have a different opinion about these things. And so it didn't work. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because you are doing something, social entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
To drive the vision of Africans being the determinants of the future of Africa.
Yeah.
So we need to do this in a way to open up everything to let others have their say.
So this is, I'd love to talk about this because, and again, you know, my background is in technology.
Yeah.
So a lot of the approach that I use borrows from a lot of that mindset that was actually developed in places like Silicon Valley.
Okay.
And so what the way I approach things is risk management, or something they call hedging your bets. And so the idea is that although you have one vision, you have many different strategies.
Yeah.
And you jump between the strategies and borrow the thing that works and use it to feed another strategy. And an example of this is when we speak about something like Pan-Africanism, it's ultimately what you're trying to do there, if you want to iterate on Pan-Africanism, is spread this ideology at the highest level. And the idea is that if everyone buys into this ideology, it will trickle down and people will start acting correctly at the lowest levels. And so that's one way to approach it. I think that's a very difficult thing to do. Almost impossible. It requires you to be a media savant in order to start at the ideology level and then create changes at the
bottom.
At the bottom.
Interesting.
And so what we actually do is, at Kwanda, we look at the bottom and the top. And so the bottom, when I talk about looking at the bottom, the question we asked is, what's the smallest unit that can affect change and then almost act as a virus and spread outwards? And then how can you look at the top level, which is the ideology, and feed that virus? And so I'll give you an actual example of how this looks.
Okay.
So we zoomed down to the community level, and we said for us, we're not trying to change Nigeria or Africa or South Africa. We're trying to change a little community in the south of Ghana that has 50 people. We're trying to create something in that community or fund something in that community that's sustainable and makes that particular community prosper.
Okay.
And prospering means everyone in the community is in agreement that we are happy with the lives we're living as a result of the things that we've done within this community.
Okay.
We are also happy that we were the ones to determine that. And so that's one cell that you've looked after, right? And then the idea is, okay, you could do it in one place, you can propagate it to another community. And really, a nation is just a sum of communities. Continent is a sum of nations. And so we work on that level.
Yeah.
And then what we do is every now and then we jump out to the top level and say, how can we take the best parts of this ideology and use it to encourage this work that's happening at the lower level? And so that's a simplistic method in that between the ideology level and the actual community level.
Yeah.
But the thing is, there's things on different levels of that ladder. And I think the mistake people make is they focus on one rung of the ladder and they say this has to work. And if it doesn't work, the whole thing is not possible. You know what I'm saying? But if you're working across all of these different rungs, you iterate towards it. And what will happen is, because you're in communication with these different levels, you're able to say, hey, actually, the Pan-African, for example, and we're just using Pan-Africanism, the ideology isn't facilitating this community development. So there's a misalignment there. And so it's like, okay, actually, these things don't link all the way up the chain. Okay, we have to iterate on that part. So you might even say, hey, researchers, is there another way we can think about Pan-Africanism that also allows us to develop these communities at a faster rate?
Yeah.
And really, that's the job. And that's why I say we're running an experiment, and we need people at different levels, not to see their level as the solution, but to contribute knowledge from the level they're operating at.
Yeah.
Down the ladder, back up the ladder.
Interesting.
We're in a position to say, hey, actually, based on the community work we're doing, X community or X country doesn't actually resonate with Pan-Africanism. And if you're sitting at that Pan-Africanism level, you'll never actually notice that there's this community that just doesn't resonate with it at all. So we need to share knowledge up and down the chain, and then we improve each piece of the vision or the strategy.
Well, see, I think I think I can contribute through this kind of platform discussion. One thing we don't do very much in our society is to sit down and talk and argue points to the minute. Okay. See, Africa is a big place. And sometimes when we say Africa, it sounds as if it's a village.
Okay?
Yeah. A lot of us blame the Western world for seeing Africa as a small place in their vision and in the way they act towards Africa. But I will tell you, we do that a lot. See, even this platform, I try to bring as many people from different areas because, see, I want us to work together as a unit, but it's not going to happen today. It's not going to happen in 10 years because I realize and I appreciate the fact that one, Africa is vast, very vast. One. Two, Africa is very diverse, very, very diverse. Okay. And those who do not appreciate these 2 points are the people who think because I have one idea in Ghana or in Kenya or in South Africa or in Nigeria or Egypt, Morocco, that idea must work all through in Africa. Yeah. It will never work. Okay, so the first thing is that we need to acknowledge the differences of our peoples. See, I say plural peoples because we are very, very different peoples. Yes, we all live on the same continent, but see, a lot of African historians also do this. Okay, we take the history of Egypt and we say it's a history of Africa. No, it's the history of Egypt.
Yes.
And Egypt is only one small place. Okay, maybe in conjunction with Sudan, maybe in conjunction with a little bit of Ethiopia, but no more than that. Yeah, that's the truth. See, I'm really passionate about these things because if we continue treating Africa as one village, then all the things we think we have in our heads will never work. It will only work once we acknowledge this place is big.
The biggest.
See, so in US, the people who live in the East Coast are very different from people who live in the West Coast.
Yeah.
And the whole of America is not bigger than maybe three quarter of West Africa. I mean, look at that. So until we acknowledge that we are vast, our continent is vast, and we are very diverse, so we should not expect us to all be the same.
Yeah, I think that's a ridiculous expectation. And when you talk about being African, Pan-African, being Nigerian, the wider group should be used only to the point that it's useful for the smallest community.
Excellent.
That's that should be the purpose of that grouping. The purpose of that grouping is, let's say you have two different communities. Let's use England as an example.
Yeah.
You have these two different communities. One of the communities is flourishing, is doing well, and the other community isn't. You go into the other community and you say, hey, how can we help? Hey, how can we improve this community?
Yeah.
Someone in the community might say, hey, we need to do this thing. Maybe we need to start this program. And then it's like, okay, at this point, we're completely ignoring the other community that's doing well, that's flourishing. And we say, okay, if we implement this program, it's going to take 2 months for the community to get to a great place, right? Because there's learning to be done, there's mistakes that will be made. And this timeline is a fake timeline. Imagine maybe 20 years.
Yeah, of course.
And so you say, okay, by our measurement, by implementing these programs, it's going to take 2 months for us to get to a good place. Now you have this other community that's flourishing. And someone says, hey, if we actually appeal to this other community and said to them, hey, could we kind of learn from some of your mistakes? Can you share some of that knowledge? We'd get there in 1 month rather than 2 months.
Yeah.
And now you would pull from this wider group and say, hey, as British people, can you help us develop the whole by sharing some of your knowledge?
Teach us something. Yeah.
Teach us something, right? And then at the point at which you use that information to get to where you need to get to, that wider grouping, you can drop it again and pick it up when it's useful. But ultimately, it's about, like, people can't think past the communities they're in for the most part. And start respecting that notion and not expecting people to be constantly thinking about, first of all, the whole country and then the whole continent. It's a ridiculous expectation to have everyone. And if we're all pretending that's what we're doing, we're not going to move anywhere.
Good. See, I realized that this before I started this platform, and I've been trying to let other people to understand that, hey, yes, we want to be one unit, but we are not. Okay. So if we really want to be one unit, then we need to start by acknowledging that we are not, and ask the questions: what differences do each small unit have that may be difficult for us to integrate ourselves? Until we do this, until we consciously do this, we will never be one unit.
And another question you can even ask is, we're so quick in that unification to throw away diversity. Sometimes you have to stop and ask, is there a benefit to the diversity and the distinction between us, you know? Because you see that in a lot of places. Like, we're proponents of that in every other area, like diversity, you know, different ideas create a great. So we need to also make sure we're not throwing away that thing that we naturally have. And there must be some use for it.
See, this is the main reason why I'm so passionate to talk about this, because we are so diverse. Okay. In truth, if we see, there are things that people from the East, West, North, South, Central do very well. And there are also many, many things that each of those groups do very badly. So we want to bring all the good things from every area and possibly eliminate all the bad things. Okay. Yeah, it's going to be, that's just a theory, but that's the thing. Yeah.
To quickly add to that, there's this idea that the way to, like, people think the way to get rid of a bad habit is by dropping it. And there's the idea that actually the way to get rid of a bad habit is by replacing it with a good one.
That's it. That's it.
So in seeking out those good things from other communities, that will actually drop the bad things.
Good.
Yeah, carry on.
See, this is in truth. This has been the way the world has progressed. See, there's nothing today that the West have been doing in the last 300 years that they started. They all started from the former big dogs in civilization. It goes from place to place to place to place. When it comes to your place, you take it, you learn it, you implement it, and then you improve it. And then some other group come and see it. This is good. They copy, take it to their place, implement, improve. That's how things has worked. Okay. See, science today, many people think, oh, it was invented by Europeans. No. Okay. The Greeks did a lot of work in those space. Okay. And then the Arabs, or not the Arabs in particular, the Islamic kingdoms did a lot of work in science. Baghdad did a lot of work in science. Okay, and then the Europeans took over. Yes, we are living in the era of European domination, and that's why people think, oh, Europe. No, Europe didn't create any of those things. Anyway, so I'm happy. See, I'm happy we're talking about this because, like I said, until we are ready to talk about this, and we need to dissect all these issues. Really need to dissect all these issues, so that it will make it simpler. The what looks like complicated, we need to disentangle them, and we can only disentangle them by talking about them, by debating them. If we don't debate them, then unfortunately we'll continue staying where we are.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, as you were talking, earlier about, or just now about science.
Yeah,
I was smiling because it reminds me of why I fell in love with technology. It's that search for the truth. It doesn't matter what the ideology is.
That's it.
How do we improve this system, this product, inch by inch, over time, and using data and sources from different places? Some of it's pure intuition, some of it's actual data.
Yeah.
But there's this ultimately a metric that you're tracking that moves forward. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how that comes to be. Almost, it's like is this search for the truth. And I think, again, like you said, I'll double on what you said. Like, that's what we need to do. We need to focus on the truth, not the thing we want it to be or the thing that would be nice, but what does move us forward as small communities.
Yeah.
And, we put it quite succinctly at Kwanda, and now I'm thinking to even expand it, because when people ask us why did we start, we say, top-down aid is broken. And we try and reverse that and say, how does it look like when you start at the recipient and bubble upwards? And we've said top-down aid or top-down funding or top-down grants, but maybe it's top-down ideologies in general. It's like, how do you start reversing everything from the bottom and bubbling upwards?
So let's go deeper into the work you guys have been doing, in this space. So tell us some of the projects that you have been engaged in and what is in the pipeline.
Yeah, sure. So one of the projects we're actually doing right now that's going really well is a project in Kenya. And to talk about the genesis of this project, it's a community called Wamuni.
Okay.
And due to climate change, for the last two years, I'd say, they've been suffering from droughts. And a lot of the farmers in that community are typically planting single crops.
Okay.
And so if for whatever reason they can't grow that crop, there's potential issues around food security, etc. And also these farmers, the reason they're planting single crops is because they just don't have enough space. So they're like, hey, what's the most nutritious thing I could plant in my small space? And also, what's the thing that's most resilient, etc. And so there's a limited amount of crops you can plant when you're facing all of these constraints.
Yeah.
And so one of the locals and organizations in that community basically started building vertical gardens. And so what they did, yeah. And so what they did is they had to do it in such a way that it's can be repeated and replicated in the community. There's no great, grand, expensive thing. What they actually did is it started with nets. So I believe it was mosquito nets or some sort of other net. And they would basically create a mound of soil, wrap the nets around, and then puncture the nets. And in these punctures, they would plant different crops.
Interesting.
And so the benefit of this is, one, you've now taken this land and reduced it to a cylinder. You can plant crops in the sides, in the top. So you could plant one crop in one side, another crop in the other side, another crop and then on the top. So there's that. And then secondly, the water usage is far more efficient because you water from the top rather than watering over a spread of land.
Yeah.
And so the way we work is we would see these solutions and we would say, hey, you've solved the chief problem in your own community.
Yeah.
We're going to give you grant funding to spread that solution, one within your own community, and then beyond it, if other communities determine that they need the same solution. We start at the solution in the community, and then we start, like a virus, we start saying, hey, is this a problem that you have?
Yeah.
Our community has solved it, and it can spread as far as the other communities need it. And so that's a project that we're doing right now that's going amazingly, and a good kind of example of what we do. And then I'll quickly run through just some other things we've done in the past.
Yeah, sure.
So, clean water pumps, but locally maintained.
Okay.
So we've done 3 of these in Tanzania so far, and there's a guy called Benedicto. He started an organization because he's an engineer, and he was able to basically create these water pumps and a training system so he can have those pumps locally maintained. And so you basically reduce this issue whereby, you do some pumps and you come back a few months or years later and
it's broken. Nobody can fix it.
No one can fix it. And again, the only reason this solution came to place is because they built the pumps for themselves.
Yeah. Local ideas and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you automatically solve all of these problems, because why would someone who built something not be able to maintain it? And so there's all of these problems that are automatically solved by the fact that they designed it in a way that would be clear to them to maintain as well.
Yeah.
So again, we just said, hey, you've done one of these, let's give you some money and you'll do, 2 more. And again, that's something we're still investing in. Period poverty, sustainable menstrual pads to girls. So one of our big theses were around education. And we believed, hey, you start with educating kids, then, that will pay dividends well into the future.
Okay.
And we saw some statistics that were quite alarming around how many hours girls lose due to misinformation around menstruation and inability to access sustainable menstrual products. And so again, when I say it's really about the metric, we were like, okay, hey, in order to the higher metric is education. Here is a thing that's somewhat indirect, but is causing us to lose
time in the education.
In the education. So we're like, okay, we need to solve this problem in order to keep pushing forward this metric around education.
Yeah.
And again, everything we do, we want it to be sustainable. We want it to be that if for whatever reason we pulled out funding, the communities can continue doing the work.
Fantastic.
And so in this particular case, this was also in Kenya and also in Zimbabwe. We basically had local seamstresses sew these sustainable menstrual products.
Okay.
And then give them to the girls. And so we also paid the seamstresses. So there was a small economy building up. They were able to give them to the girls, but also sell excess on the market because there was alongside that training happening in the community. So an awareness was being raised. So other girls, even parents, mothers would be like, hey, we want these things as well. And so in that way, you know, we haven't invested in that community for maybe a year or so now, and it's still happening. And the same with the wells and the vertical gardens.
Yeah.
And so again, another big thing for us is sustainability.
Yeah.
Like we're not going, and I know a lot of people say to us, hey, like we should give food to this community. And in odd cases, we might do it. Like we might do it odd, like, hey, to our community, we want to, but generally we're biasing towards things that are sustainable. Definitely not just sustainable for a few years or in certain conditions, but indefinitely.
Wow.
So we've done
your strategy and tactics are wonderful and are sustainable, and that's the key. You know, see, these local solutions to local problems. You see, oh my God, this is good.
That's the idea is, local solutions to local problems.
Local solutions for local problems. And then when it has been let me use the word sanitized well, it's structured in a way that is very sustainable, other communities can learn it and take it to their own place and maybe modify them a little bit and then implement. That's good.
And that's what we do. And when I say then we move to another level, which is more of this propagation ideology. So it's like, you know, the solution, we build it in the community, and then we say, hey, maybe we need to raise awareness about hours that are being lost. And then it's like, okay, what can we do on that level of education, awareness? And we jump between the two, and all of the levels are useful, but we primarily focus on the lowest level. Like that's the level where it's almost impossible to make mistakes. Because I think the problem with ideology is there are sometimes second order effects that you won't notice when you're dealing with massive people.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with 50 people that just say, hey, the problem is I want to be able to grow 3 different crops and use less water and get less land. You can solve that problem and know that there wasn't any damage is contained within the community.
Yeah.
And so we try to focus on that level. And like, again, we'll borrow ideas from, you know, even like when we talk about the period poverty, the knowledge we gained, we didn't generate that knowledge ourselves. Someone said that and we were like, oh, we were trying to get girls in school within this community.
Yeah.
And then we kind of looked up a level and realized that there's a whole bunch of people focusing on period poverty. And we're like, why? And we're like, this problem that they're on is probably affecting the girls in the community that we're working in. And then we borrowed that, implement it, and then now we're able to like create the solution and then propagate it back outwards and say, actually, these people up here are like talking about the right thing. We have evidence for it in this small community.
Interesting. Well done, guys. Well done. So, see, in doing all those things, I'm very sure that you guys must have faced several challenges. Okay. So tell me, what kind of challenges have you guys encountered encountered in this work?
Oddly enough, and I'll keep saying this, when you start at the bottom, it gets rid of a lot of problems.
Yeah.
The biggest challenges we face today happen when we try to implement solutions at the highest levels.
Wow.
And I'll give you different examples going down the scale. When the NSARS protests were happening in Nigeria,
2020, yeah.
2020, yeah.
Yeah.
We wanted to get some funds over to support with protesters.
Yeah.
And I think as the day before we were trying to get those funds over, the Nigerian government had blocked transfers.
Wow.
In maybe, I don't know if it was to specific accounts, but
must have been.
Yeah, we couldn't get money in. And we had in our community, we have a process of voting. So actually, before we send money anywhere, we hold a vote, and our community members say, yeah, this is like, we like this proposal, this is something we should support. And so we'd already held that vote, we'd already promised we're going to get this money out, and then this block happens. And internally, there's a lot of policy around, do you skirt government? How do we report this? We essentially made the decision to say, we're going to skirt this, and we're going to send it in Bitcoin, actually.
Ooh.
So we eventually sent it in Bitcoin, and that's how we skirted the problem. But at that time, we weren't equipped to be dealing with things at that level. There's government, there's no real, it becomes like almost an opinion, like who's right, and you pick a side. And that always makes things difficult. And then if you go up a level, and this is actually a reason that caused us to make quite a big shift. We initially said, and it speaks to the problem you were discussing at the beginning, actually. So you'll see how now I'm quite aligned with you in that. We initially said, hey, we're providing funding or resources for Black communities. And the problem there is we spent half of the time actually doing stuff in communities, and half of the time trying to prescribe to our team members what it means to be Black. And, we ultimately came to the decision that this is a high order conversation that's being had for many years. Our job isn't to prescribe to people whether they're Black or not. Like, I remember there was a time where there was something going around about Somalians not considering themselves as Black.
Okay.
And then it was kind of like, oh, Kwanda, do you consider them Black? Like, if someone says they're not Black, but you're saying, hey, we're going to give you funding because you're Black. And it was just like, ultimately, like, this isn't our job. Like, we want to help people on the local level. And so we and it's a tough decision to make, because, again, a lot of people that have the ideology that we're all Black, we all have a shared experience, they felt like it was a bit of a cop-out for us to remove that and say, actually, we're focusing on communities, not the wider. But that's actually more of the challenge we faced, was more around how do we get our team to focus in a particular place if these terms are still loosely defined.
Do you know why it happens? Because when you go a notch up beyond the community, it becomes political.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And that's a different skill set entirely.
That's it. Once you go beyond communities, it becomes political. And that's a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, and I'm personally not with that. If I'm being honest, interested. I'm very much a numbers, like, I like being a computer. I like seeing, like, okay, we've managed to help 1,000 people, 1,500. That's kind of the thing that drives me.
See, that's why I say all these issues who that becomes political needs to be solved by dialogue, debate.
And then we need to have time for it.
Yeah.
It can't be a rush solution.
And these are beyond people like you who want to deliver things to communities. Okay. It's for people for intellectual discussion. See, and for me, people like, well, I put myself in this space because I like to think about things and write things. See, we need to write books in Africa. We just need to see, we have so many different ideas about so many different things. Instead of just keeping them in our thoughts, let's pen them down. Okay. And then distribute our thoughts. Let other people read them, come back, argue about them, tell me my idea is stupid, but tell me how.
Yes.
Okay. So you write your own book and dissect my own idea and tell me why this is not true, or it won't work, or whatever. See, I will tell you this. I would say it is the most. It was a work. It was that kind of work done in Europe in the 17th, 18th centuries that Europe has been living off since the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
Because all those things that the society wasn't very sure about, people dissected them.
Document.
Economics, religion, this, that, and dissected them so thoroughly that today that's still what they are living on. And that's what the majority of the planet are living on.
Yeah.
So we have peculiar issues in Africa which we need to dissect and stop telling people that because you don't agree with me, you are not African.
It's actually, it's funny you say that. I agree completely. And I actually had an idea specifically. If I wasn't doing Kwanda, I think this is the thing I'd want to build. And I actually had an idea specifically around what you spoke about, which is iterating upon knowledge.
Yeah.
And the idea was, so there is this new breed of note-taking apps that's becoming popular. They're called like second brains. And the way they work is you have an idea or concept, let's say femininity in Africa or feminism in Africa.
Yeah.
And then you essentially write down your thoughts and theories around it. You reference different pieces, etc. And then what you can do now is, let's say you read this book that kind of shifts those ideas. You can essentially write a second piece that iterates on the first, and you'll see there'll be a link because all of these notes are networks, and you'll be able to say that, okay, this is the book that I read that upgraded the thinking on feminism in Africa, right? And so that would be a way for you to, as a single node, iterate on your own understanding of things.
Yeah.
And now imagine if you had a network of people doing this.
Yeah.
So someone's basically saying, hey, this is your understanding here. This is mine based on
this and that and that.
This and that. And can we do, and in programming, it's called a merge. You basically merge the code bases. It's like merging of those ideas. And that becomes
a bigger, very good.
Yeah. And the most current shared understanding of that thing.
Yeah.
And so that way we're not losing knowledge. We're like, and if you want to go back down the chain and say, actually, remove this and revert back to our understanding a year ago. Like, so that's something that I think, on what you said, would be like a good tool to have if we could bring all those minds together.
Yeah. See, the first thing is that we need to understand that we need to do this, because if you don't do it, we're not going anywhere.
Evidence is key. Like you said, when you said we need to write, and that's a big part of our ethos at Kwanda, is we're not going to tell you what's happening, or we're going to show you the evidence of it in a fixed form. And it's the same with this knowledge. We need evidence of what's the highest level we've reached on this particular point of the discussion. So someone that says, hey, you know what, in this discussion around Africa as a continent or Pan-Africanism, I want to engage, but I want to come in at the point at which we currently are. I don't want to learn a new stream of knowledge and start arguing that against canon, if you know what I mean. Because that would be the problem I would have. I'd say, okay, I want to start theorizing around African flourishing. Where are we collectively? What's the last agreed upon milestone or checkpoint where there are limited arguments? It's just like science. Like, you know, I want to iterate on this particular on cancer. I want to, like, where are we? Like, where are all the science? Where's the scientific community on around breast cancer, prostate cancer? And then let me start there, rather than coming up with this entirely different theory, which is useful at times, but you need something to pit it against.
Yeah. Wow. See, this discussion is interesting for me because, see, this is what I like to do.
It's fun. So, definitely, I enjoy it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I have tried to do work on the continent, I've tried to do work in Nigeria specifically.
Okay.
And one of the challenges which I encountered was about integrity, about money. Yeah. It's a serious thing. I have one of my mentors, Nigerian. He in the last 5 years, he has done a lot of work in Nigeria. He's building a big business in Nigeria. And last year, one of his employees, a former classmate of his, who he employed in his business, stole a large chunk of money. You know, so these things about integrity, see, we have a lot of young people who are talented. Okay, so I know if I go down there to find talents, I will find talents. But what I don't know is the talent. Is that person dedicated to flourish by his talent, or he's looking at to put his hand in the pocket of the company? I don't know.
That's it goes to the thing I expressed earlier around one outcome or vision, but different strategies. When that's a problem that I've also like encountered. And for me, these are fun challenges, if I'm being honest. That's just how my brain works. Then I say to myself, okay, there's two paths, like you've expressed. Like, is he dedicated to like really expressing his talent to the fullest extent? Like, is he motivated by that self-realization? And then the other is this person just trying to get some money? And then the challenge that comes to me is both of those ideas are boring ones.
Okay.
What about this third path where you align incentives so perfectly that the person dismisses either of the other two and goes with this third thing, which is like, hey, this is a way for you to self-realize, and the money is just going to be just at the edge of where you can get it, that you to push your talent to grab it. And it's like there's almost an engineering of social psychological engineering that has to take place in order to do this. And I think this is, you know, the way like great leaders in the business world build great teams as well.
Yep.
And the thing I always say, you know, incentive, like designing incentives is more important than anything you can do.
Designing incentives. Yes.
Yeah. Because the reason like this thing happens is because there's bad incentives.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. That's true.
What's the incentive to in like Nigeria? I've spent some time in Nigeria. It will be hard to convince someone that, you know, deep diving, forgetting money, forgetting what you're going to eat, and deep diving on your talent is the path forward. In a country like England, maybe that's rewarded more, but in Nigeria,
I'll correct that. I'll correct that. See, when I grew up in Nigeria, I grew up in Nigeria. So, okay, I've been in this country this month. I've been here for 17 years this month. Okay. When I grew up in Nigeria and started my career in Nigeria, yes, we had issues, but the everyday person didn't have the level of integrity issues like we have today.
I've had the same.
Okay. I mean, when I grew up, if your mate hears that you stole 1 naira from your mommy's table, oh my God, they will shame you. Yeah.
I think this is definitely a conversation.
I'll give you this. When I was about 10, there was this Choco Milo we buy, right? Okay. See, if I go to the shop behind my house to buy Choco Milo and I presented some coin or notes that the shop owner doesn't think I should have, she will ask me, who gave you to you? And she might take it, don't give me anything and tell me, I want to see your mommy. Yeah.
So what I would say to that is there's obviously a lot of facts we won't be able to cover.
Yeah, of course.
That could be around, you know, glorification of money.
Yeah.
You know, normalization of lack of integrity, all of these things. The way I see these things now is like, and it's a helpful framing that I use to engage in it in a way that I feel is productive, which is, okay, I always see things as ideas, and the most powerful idea wins out over the long term.
Yeah.
And so the way I would look at situations like this is that there is
it wins out only if everybody agrees.
Yeah.
That idea is the thing. Okay.
I think the effectiveness of an idea is measured by the agreement of others as well.
Exactly.
Even if it's a bad idea. And it's like memes almost. And it's like that's why religion's a very powerful one.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so even in this thing, it's like, okay, there's something about integrity, even though it might not serve the person, lack of integrity, it's got some pieces that are compelling to it nowadays.
Yeah.
You could say that maybe it's music or the films we're watching to that are feeding into that idea. And so the thing is like, okay, we can't combat this with this thing as it evolved. We can't combat it with an unevolved version of the thing that we think is good. You know what I'm saying? And so it's like, okay, how do we now create something that feeds it? And that's the challenge and the thing we're really trying to do at Kwanda as well. Is like, how do we make giving cool in the same way that individualism has so much propaganda towards it. Like, yo, nobody cares, work harder. Like, we're fighting against that meme, and it's like, okay, how do we like make this cool? Whether it's rappers or musicians start talking about, like, so it's like it's a fight ultimately.
Yeah.
And I think it's one that, you know, many might say we're losing,
Well,
but you know, sometimes you have to use some of the same tactics and tricks
yeah.
that are used to propagate bad ideas to also propagate. Yeah.
Well, see, there's something I really want to talk to you about. Okay. That's about charitable giving. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys are a philanthropic organization. Okay. And you guys are doing fantastic work. I mean, hey, I'm so impressed about all the things you have told me. But see, I see the way we have used philanthropic organizations, NGOs in the continent has not helped us as a whole. Okay, because I mean, a few years ago, when I started coaching young people in Africa, almost 70% of the young people I was coaching wanted to start NGOs.
Interesting.
Few wanted to start a for-profit business.
Yeah, that's interesting.
In fact, I had to make a video on my personal channel about why people should start for-profit business more than NGOs. That was about 4 or 5 years ago. Okay, and it was mind-boggling to me why everybody wants to do NGO. Why? Anyway, see, aid is sweet. Aid is sweet for the person or the people who get the aid. But at the end of the day, the communities don't get the reward that the aid is supposed to fund. So for me, I'm mostly encouraging young people to start for-profit business. I mean, hey, I agree. There's still the need for some amount of a philanthropy. Okay, but I want more and more people to start for-profit business. What's your view?
No, I agree. So this is the way I think about it. I think non-profits or charitable giving serves two needs. And we adopt both of those in Kwanda. So the first one is, I think most people, and again, it's this idea of different strategies to the same outcome.
Yeah.
So I believe businesses, for-profit businesses, offer the most incentive for positive change. And that's the thing about, like, if you can couple the want to build wealth with the want to improve the world, that's the most like powerful combination you can have, in my opinion.
Okay.
And so I tell people to think about Kwanda as definitely not aid. We approach it as the closest thing to Kwanda is scientific grants.
Okay.
And so the idea is we try to fund the solutions that aren't already obviously commercially viable. And our long-term plan is to move, for example, and I can use the example of the vertical gardens.
Yeah.
So nobody's looking at the space. if we can fund the prototype, then we can then say, hey, this is a go-to-market ready product.
Good one.
Now this community has a export and the profits pour into the community. So it's kind of like we catalyze the ideas.
Yeah.
Kind of like scientific grants, research grants, kind of like,
Yeah.
hey, let's give you something to think of something cool and then you can commercialize it later. That's what we do in Kwanda. That's how we think of ourselves.
Good.
That's the way in which I think non-profits can be useful. Catalyzing innovation that can then go to market and again sustains itself at that point.
Yeah.
Once it goes to market, it sustains itself. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is just that I believe as individuals, there is something we're currently spending money on that is useless. And that money can be in some way given to our neighbor, and not as a benefit necessarily to our neighbor, but as a benefit to ourselves.
Okay.
And the reason I think that's important is because I think it's useful to feel like you are a person that has something to give.
Okay.
I think that's a useful thing to feel as an entrepreneur or as a builder, and to train that muscle. And in myself, I've noticed that, and that's why, like at Kwanda, the term we use is not capital P philanthropy, but instead micro philanthropy.
Yeah.
Believe rather than single philanthropists or big NGOs, all you need is micro philanthropists. The same way like microtransactions.
Yeah.
Because what happens is you don't feel that money leave your wallet, yet you have a massive impact. And so I think that's just a hack we should do. It's just like, imagine, everyone in the world, like 1 pence was coming out of their account and going into scientific grants. It's just a lovely, useful capital generation hack. And then I think if you connect those two bits of the funnel, where it's like, on the one hand, you have these people that don't feel like they're putting a lot of income out, and then that income is then funding scientific grants, research grants that lead to innovations and go-to-markets that started from a social place.
Yeah.
Then I think you improve the business market, one, because now more of the businesses in that area they have a social tilt to them as well. And so it's this through and through funnel, and it's just tactical. It's just that, hey, I think, one of the best ways to bring more, because my thing is everyone should be an entrepreneur and try and that's like in some capacity.
Yeah.
I think it's a cool thing to
see every African, in truth, every African community from old has been built by people who want to make their own life better.
Yes. And naturally make everyone else's.
I'm digressing a little bit. See, again, this is one thing I disagree with a lot of Pan-Africanists. Most of them are Marxists, okay, and socialists. The African, let me limit it to myself and my village, okay, my ancestors, my grandfathers, okay. I saw one of my great grandfathers, okay, he died at over 100, okay. My village, everybody does things to improve themselves. We don't rely on the village to feed us. A family have a farm, yam, cassava, this, that. Okay? When they harvest those things, they take them to the market. They sell them. And they don't give that money to the community. They put the money in their pocket. So when I hear Pan-Africanists say that the way forward is socialism, Marxism, I look at them. Which Africa are you from? Obviously, not from my village. See, these are the things that we need to talk about. So these are the reasons why I'm not on board with it, because it doesn't represent me.
It's interesting. That's why you know you know. That's why I use very particular words. Because, like, for example, someone might say, "Hey, are you capitalist or are you socialist? Like, you have to choose one."
Me, I will tell them I'm capitalist,
Yes,
because
yeah.
hey, that's what works for me, okay, and that's what has shown to be viable. Okay. Now,
See, I wouldn't say I'm capitalist, but I would say I'm trying to hop upon the most effective incentive.
okay,
I think capitalism likely is the largest share of that. I
yeah,
think maybe it's a combination of things, but it's almost like, what's the combination of systems that you can put together that will drive the most change? And I do think wealth, even the want to have more than someone else, is a powerful driver.
see that need to have more than others. It's for me, it's getting to extreme, and that's, see, you don't need to, for me, okay, for me, I don't need to have more than others, okay. That should not be my motivation. I want to be richer than Jermaine. But yeah, I accept that it might be the motivation for many other people, but for me, it's not. Okay.
Yeah. And
But
when I say more, it's not necessarily even money.
okay.
It can be it can be a lot of things that are actually considered healthy.
Yeah. Okay.
For example, you're in a sports team.
Mm.
You want to be the hardest working person there. You want to
Okay.
score the most goal. And so
Okay.
again, that drive, I think what happens is, obviously, people apply it to money in the systems that we typically live in.
Yeah.
But again, it's like, how can you take that and apply it to something that's positive
Yeah.
ultimately? And so yeah, I think those kind of natural drivers, like I think people demonize them because of the thing they're being applied to. For example, capitalism, the system is a very effective, and sometimes I even think natural, like people naturally gravitate towards capitalism.
See,
Um,
until capitalism come on board in the 18th century, I mean, in 2 centuries, we have done what humanity has not been able to do for hundreds of thousands of years in 2 centuries.
so
I mean, hey,
it's a powerful
is it, see, now, is it perfect?
directed.
It's not perfect at all. At all. Okay? But it's damn effective.
It's effective, and it's just about pointing it in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Now we need to modify some things to take off some edges. Okay.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
this thing about we need to abandon it. Anybody who starts a conversation that we need to abandon it, I will say, okay, this person is not for, see, I'm going in a direction that I didn't plan to. See, I have never thought about all these things until, hey, I was a banker. I worked in one of the biggest banks in the world, but I have never thought about these things. And that's something that blows my mind. How could you? But most people just go to work, do their jobs, and they don't think about things. See, I started thinking about this maybe 6, 7 years ago. You see, and if you look at some books I have there, there are written by socialists. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking, yeah, it works. Something, but about 4 years ago, I just dumped it because I saw that that things about it that just doesn't work. Anyway, see, let's not waste too much time. Okay. Let me ask you one final question. See, I like reading. Okay, like I've shown you so many books in my shelf. Okay.
Yeah.
See, I like to encourage people to read. So please recommend for me 5 books for my audience. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Can I also briefly describe what I think is important about those books?
Of course.
The first one is maybe one of my favorite books. It's called On the Shortness of Life.
On the Shortness.
On the Shortness of Life, yeah.
Interesting.
It was written by Seneca.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's really a commentary on the many ways in which we waste our time. And one of the like we spoke about on this conversation, I think it points out the importance of going for the truth of the matter. Because if you avoid the truth, you end up wasting swaths of time. And truth is a time-saving mechanism.
Yep.
I think that's what I get from that book. Favorite book for sure.
Second, I will look for it.
Oh, read that book, definitely. Second one is The E-Myth Revisited.
E-Myth. Okay.
This is a good book for entrepreneurs, business owners.
Okay.
And specifically because most people work in their business rather than on their business.
Okay.
And again, it's
interesting.
It's a truth-seeking kind of thing. I think that's the thing that a lot of the books that I read kind of is about. Hey, how can you go towards the truth and not the thing that's nice to hear? That's another book. It kind of shows you that, hey, you're not building a business, you're building a job. And this is what it looks like when you're building a business.
Yeah.
The other one is The Will to Change.
The what?
The Will to Change.
Oh, Will to Change. Okay.
I believe Bell Hooks.
I'll find it. I'll find it.
I believe so. And really that book, it talks about patriarchy. And I don't actually agree with a lot of the prescriptions in the book.
Okay.
But the utility of that book for me is something that fundamentally challenges my worldview.
Okay.
And actually,
the will to change.
The will to change. And for one, it's weird. It makes you consider yourself as a victim, even though you've always seen yourself as someone who has control, right? And ultimately, the reason I say I don't agree with a lot of prescriptions is because it's never been useful for me to consider. Like, I don't think it's a productive
thing to see yourself as a victim. Yeah, me too. Me too.
Productive for myself. But it's interesting to allow yourself to go in there and have your brain like scrambled in that way. And I think I've never had a book do that to me. A lot of the times I've read books, it's like, okay, it shifts my opinion slightly, but it doesn't catapult me into another dimension.
Okay.
And then one that's very important to me is a book called Daily Rituals.
Daily Ritual, okay.
Daily Rituals. And it's actually a book that briefly summarizes the daily rituals of famous artists, writers, politicians in the past. And the reason this is important to me is I've always seen myself as a bit of an outcast. Like if you were to shadow me for a day, a lot of the things I do are very strange and specific.
Wow.
So that book, I've got to peer into the lives of other famous artists, etc., and see that they do outrageous stuff. So it really normalizes. I used to think, I'm weird, you know, how am I measuring my sleep? And I have a journal that, like, you know, all of these things, or like every time I have a conversation, I say, what did I learn from that? How could it, like, all of these measurements and data things. And then it's just a book that shows how people have that same thing in a whole bunch of different ways.
Yeah.
So like, okay, I'm allowed to like do all of these weird, quirky things.
Yeah.
And then one, I'm actually reading it right now.
Mm.
It's called Banker to the Poor.
Banker to the Poor.
I think it's
Interesting.
Mohammed Yunus, and it talks about the rise of microloans.
Okay.
And how it's been impactful in continent like Africa,
Okay.
Asia, Latin
Okay.
America, etc.
Interesting.
And I've only just started reading it, so I'll have
Okay.
to let you know what I
Okay.
think and what I'll
Wow.
take later. But it's supposed to be a very interesting book.
Good. Good. Thank you for that. Now, I want to combine two of my favorite questions. See, you are relatively a young African, okay, compared to me. I'm an old man. So, see, you are doing something I consider fantastic to help communities in Africa. So, you are the right person to advise other Africans about what they can do in their own little spaces to add value to their communities. That's one. Two, I want you to share your vision for Africa for the next 30 years. What do you see?
Okay. I've got movies in my mind, so this is going to be, I'll try and condense it. I think to start with the first question, I think people should, this thing I'm about to prescribe, if they do it, I think they will naturally become more involved in a way that's productive and good.
Okay.
I think they should get excited about the positive things that are happening on the continent, the innovation that is happening on the continent. Like, for a second, put aside the political issues or the past corruption or whatever it might be, and just like take a look in, fintech or agri-tech and see like some of the cool things that people are creating on the African continent, and pan forward, and you can see how those innovations are going to transform not only Africa but are going to transform Europe, the Americas, Asia. Some of these cool ideas. Like, there's so much great stuff that's happening that you see it and you're just inspired. You're like, whoa, this is an innovative continent. This is a continent full of entrepreneurs, scientists, trailblazers. So I think try and seek out that, and it's not that hard to find. There's a lot of like, tech is a good place to start because it's quite popular and it's easy to find, like, Disrupt Africa or some of these like tech blogs. So that's the thing I'd recommend. That's where I started. In terms of vision, I believe it's inevitable that from the small communities to the large continent to the diaspora, Africa is gonna become something very interesting and inspirational.
I agree.
And I'm not sure what form that will take, but I see the younger Africans in the diaspora and on the continent right now, and the thinking is changing. The internet as a playground is germinating so many different ideas and ideals, and I think there's only so long that people will remain within a constraint before it starts bursting at the seams. There's so many ideas right now. People talking about sovereign nations, digital nations. These are nations where people network online, create a community, eventually an economy, and then crowdsource real estate.
Yeah.
There's people talking about building seasteading, where you build on the sea and build new nations, or smaller nations. And I think the fact that, like, if you think about where we were, these ideas are not ridiculous anymore. It's like people are talking about.
They're not.
So it's like, and then now, combine that with things like AI, etc.
Yeah.
If we're thinking about this now, what ideas are we going to have?
In
One,
50 years, 100 years. Yeah.
And then two, what of these ideas would have been implemented in 50 years? And once you start talking about people are ready to build new nations on the sea, then just imagine all the different things we could do that still exist within some of those countries. Simple things, just like more business owners, a better kind of understanding of business on the African continent, trade between African countries improving. Like there's just so many. It would be a disservice to try and paint one vision because there's just so many different realities. But I think a lot or most of them are positive ones.
Wow.
So I think create your own for now. And
wow.
find the smallest component of that and start working on it.
Jermaine, it's been a fantastic session. I mean, maybe I hope I didn't bore you with my.
No, this was great. This was great. This felt like a
good,
very just
good,
natural,
good.
like,
I'm so happy. See what you guys are doing. It's something that other people need to copy from. Yeah. See, the world is about copying. Okay, it's about copying. See, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Okay, copy, modify,
ideas.
implement.
Right ideas.
Yeah. So thank you very much for being a fantastic guest of the Think Big for Africa podcast.
Thank you for hosting me. I've had a lot of fun. We should definitely speak again.
Good. Thank you very much.